Hero, tell me something. Are you curious about Judaism? Are you curious about Jewish people? If you're like some of my listeners, you may even be considering converting to Judaism yourself. Now, whether you are or whether you're not, that's totally up to you. I'm not here to push you. Whatever it is that's making you curious about Judaism, you have to listen to this guest that I have today. His name is Rabbi Adam Greenwald. He will blow your mind here in the Jewcurious Show, Episode 1. Welcome, hero. Let's hit the waves.
Welcome to the Jewcurious Show, where learning about Judaism and getting to know Jewish people can help you live a life of meaning, joy, human connection, and personal growth. And now your host, Rabbi John Carrier.
Thank you, Ron. Hero, welcome back to the Jewcurious Show here on Episode 1. How can I welcome you back to Episode 1? Well, I don't know what you've heard before, because there's an Episode 0 and there's an Episode 2 and 3 already out there, because this is launch week. This is the launch week of this podcast. I've got so many great interviews in store for you. I couldn't give you just one, so I gave you 3. Plus, there's an Episode 0 that tells you a little bit about me and why I started this show and why I think it might be right for you. It's not for everybody, but just in case it's for you, I decided to make it anyway. And we're kicking off this whole Jewcurious project with someone who was the most popular episode of my first podcast, The Wisdom Community. Far and away, the most downloaded episode was my interview with Rabbi Adam Greenwald, the director for the Miller Introduction to Judaism program at American Jewish University in Los Angeles, California. Rabbi Greenwald's been a good friend of mine for years. We were in rabbinical school at the same time. He's a little more seasoned than I am. We've continued to learn together. I've learned a lot from Rabbi Greenwald, both in his cohort as a fellow in the Rabbis Without Borders program, as well as being a teacher in his Miller Introduction to Judaism program. He is brilliant, he is driven, and above all, he is a mensch doing great things for the Jewish people, and I'm going to say human beings at large. That's why I'm so excited to share Rabbi Greenwald with you, especially, but not exclusively, when he answers this question that I get all the time, which is Judaism a religion, or maybe is Judaism a race? Is it a faith, or is it a people? And I think his answer might surprise you. Without further ado, one small ado. Rabbi Greenwald's such a busy man. The only way I could get this interview was by calling him on the phone and recording it. So I'm apologizing in advance. The audio quality is a little bit staticky. However, I know his heart and his wisdom comes through in his answers. So as your rabbi, I advise you to listen to the entire interview. If you're listening to this on your smartphone, I'm going to tell you to put that phone in your pocket. Don't touch it. Don't pause it. Just listen to the whole thing all the way through. But before you put the phone in your pocket, there's one favor I want to ask of you, and that is to hit the subscribe button on the podcast listening platform of your choice. In case we get separated on this journey, hero, I want to make sure that you have this episode, other episodes, and all future episodes downloaded automatically onto your phone, because we've got a lot of great work to do together. We've got a lot of great learning to do together. And so I'd really like us to stick together. And we could do that by your hitting the subscribe button on your phone and then putting that phone in your pocket. If you're easily excited, you may want to pull over the car, because you're about to get some powerful learning dropped on you by my guest, Rabbi Adam Greenwald. Here we go. Coming to the stage, I have Rabbi Adam Greenwald. Rabbi Adam Greenwald, you're on the phone with me, and I am so grateful to you for having this conversation with me.
Hey, friend.
So, Adam, why don't you, for the sake of the Jewcurious, tell me who you are and what you do?
So my name is Adam Greenwald. I'm a rabbi, and I, for the last 6 years, have been the director of the Miller Introduction to Judaism program at American Jewish University, which is a bit of a mouthful of a title. But basically, I'm in new Jew construction. I work with people who are in process of becoming Jewish from every different background that you can imagine, that come to the American Jewish University to come and take classes and take the next big step in their journey.
If you're building a new Jewish person, what are the parts that go into that? Is that like lumber, screws?
One part gefilte fish, one part chicken fat, stir it all together. Well, actually, the process of becoming Jewish really starts with the process of learning. And one of the things I so value about Judaism is we are a people who take learning so seriously and believe that it's not enough to just feel committed to something. You have to really also understand it too. So when somebody comes to me and says, I am thinking about becoming Jewish, the first thing that we do is sign them up for a class. Mm-hmm. The sort of signature course that I run here from the university is an 18-week, once-a-week class that covers a little bit of everything. So it covers history and traditions and culture and big ideas and great thinkers, and also the nuts and bolts of how to do Jewish, like how to light Shabbat candles, or how to tell if a food is kosher or not, or how to feel comfortable in a synagogue, knowing when to stand up and when to sit down and when to bow and all that good stuff.
Okay, fantastic. Now, I imagine that might be something of a screening tool. Do you get anybody coming into your office and like, hey, I want to be Jewish and I'm super excited about it, and you're like, here's some school, and they're like, oh, never mind?
Well, I do think that becoming Jewish is something that requires a level of commitment, right? It's not something you wake up in the morning one morning and say, I think I want to be a Jew. And by the end of the day, you are officially a member of this ancient people. It's a process. I don't really think of myself as the troll at the gate trying to keep people out who might want to come be with us. We're not really a big enough people that we can afford to turn people away who have a genuine and sincere desire to be Jewish. But I do want people who are making this commitment to make it from a place of seriousness and a place of integrity and a place of knowledge, and all of that takes time.
Gotcha. So the learning process, it's not just a place to weed people out like organic chemistry gets rid of people who shouldn't be doctors, but it's also on a meta level to that. It takes time, which allows people to evaluate their decision and their commitment, and it shows commitment on their part. I mean, there's no, as far as I remember, there's no sort of multiple choice test you have to take at the end, and if you didn't learn enough, you can't be Jewish. I could be wrong. I don't know what the kids are doing these days. I
think about conversion very similar to the way that I think about marriage. Right? There are a few people out there who meet somebody, have a whirlwind 24-hour romance, and then drive off to Las Vegas to get married right away. Most people spend time getting to know their partner and recognize that you know a person more deeply when you've been with them a week than a day, and a month than a week, and a year than a month. And most of the time, before we make a decision that is a life-changing decision, we need some time to marinate on that and to really come to understand the full implications of the choices that we're making. So I want people who are becoming Jewish to take it as seriously as somebody who is coming to the chuppah, to the wedding canopy, to decide to pick their life with somebody. And there may be a few people out there who are able to come to a truly informed decision overnight, but I think that they are few and far between. I think most people need that time, need that process in order to be able to get to a place where they can actually say, this is what I want for my life, with full integrity and full intention to make this not just a whim, a flavor of the month, but a commitment to the way that they're living going forward.
That's fantastic. I love this wedding metaphor that we've got going on here, because instead of starting a relationship with one person, you're starting a relationship with approximately 20 million people. Don't freak out, potential converts. You don't have the same responsibilities to each of those 20 million people like you might have to a single spouse. So don't get scared. Don't get excited. It's an apt metaphor, because especially because I think that when you get married, it's after, God willing, a thorough courtship, and you really have a sense of something that you're committed to, and you still have no idea how it's going to go. Right.
One of my favorite things to say to wedding couples is a line from the author E.L. Doctorow, who said that writing a novel is a lot like driving at night. You can see as far as the headlights shine, but you can actually make the whole trip that way.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I think that's how people make a life together, right? You don't know what's around the next bend. You don't see the whole road, but you know that you've got somebody with you who shines enough light that you can actually make the whole trip. And similarly with taking on a religious commitment, you don't know how faith and life and belief is going to evolve over the course of all of the ups and downs and obstacles and learning opportunities we have over the course of our lifetimes. But you need to be pretty sure that this is the light that you want to help lead you in the direction toward meaning and wisdom and community.
That's awesome. Now, I have to ask the question, do you officiate many weddings?
I do officiate a lot of weddings because so many people go through my program when they are somebody becoming Jewish as part of their relationship with a Jew. I get to know a lot of young couples, and I am blessed to do a lot of weddings.
Let me change gears a little bit. If you imagine in this work that you interact with a fair number of other rabbis sitting on Beit Din and things like that in your work in the community, can I ask, what's the strangest encounter that you've ever had with another rabbi that you're willing to talk about?
I mean, when you're talking about interactions between rabbis, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find one that you would really classify as normal. So what is the strangest interaction? I mean, I'll just say that every rabbi has their own unique approach, not just to issues around conversion, but to anything Jewish. You know, we tend to joke that it's 2 Jews, 3 opinions. If you have 2 rabbis in the room, you have a minimum of like 8 opinions. So in each and every interaction I have with another rabbi, I'm aware that in some way we are speaking the very same language because we're speaking it out of a common tradition. But in other ways, we're each doing things and looking at things in a different way. And so, you know, I particularly say to your listeners, if they're making relationships with rabbis, that it's okay to get to know more than one. In fact, I think it's a benefit to get to know as many rabbis as you can, because with each rabbi, you get a slightly different perspective on what Jewish is. And that's not shopping around. That's actually getting the experience to know that Judaism is a wide and multifaceted thing. And no one person, just like no one book, is going to be able to encompass all of it.
So that's a way better answer than I thought you were going to give. I was thinking specifically, and I don't ask this to every guest, but have you ever encountered a rabbi while wearing a Santa suit?
Oh, you want to know about that story?
And so the answer you just gave was fantastic in so many ways. And I would echo that for anybody listening to this podcast, that you should get to know a number of rabbis. But would you advise getting to know a rabbi while wearing a Santa suit?
You know, funny story. So I, in my pre-rabbi days, did serve as a Santa Claus for a few years at a children's hospital where my mother works as a social worker. I was the Christmas Eve Santa because the regular Santa wanted to be home with his family on Christmas Eve. So who do you get to fill in late Christmas Eve afternoon? You find a Jew. And thankfully, I come with my own padding. So I was a good candidate to be Santa Claus. And I would go around to the different rooms with a big gurney full of presents, and had some really amazing experiences, actually, during my time being a Santa. I remember going into the room of a gang member who had been shot, and I walked into the room, and he took one look, this big, tough, tatted up guy, he took one look at Santa, and he, hopped out of bed as much as one can hop out of bed when one has a bullet bullet wound just to like run over to me to give me a hug.
Wow.
So had, just some really lovely experiences doing that. But the strangest experience I had was one year Christmas Eve was also Friday night, was also the evening of Shabbat. And I'm walking around the hallway of the hospital, and I see a local, very Orthodox rabbi who I didn't know well, but I did recognize, but he certainly didn't recognize me. And as I'm walking by, out of my mouth comes what I would typically say to somebody like that when I see them on Friday afternoon. I said, "Rabbi, good Shabbos." And he looked up, and he did a double take, and he may have done a triple take, and he just started laughing in the hallway, and I sort of got embarrassed and kept walking along. And what's funny is I have heard that story now retold through other people. So apparently he has spoken about that in sermons and in the synagogue the time the rabbi wished him, or the time the Santa Claus, rather, wished him good Shabbos, and it has now circulated its way all the way back to me.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm afraid I've chosen a line of business where I don't get to wear a Santa suit that often, because if I could in one trip wish a rabbi Shabbat shalom and get hugged by somebody with a gunshot wound, that would be amazing. So
I don't think the issue is your line of work. I think the issue is you've gotten too skinny lately. You're looking really good, Rabbi Carrier.
Yes, and I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast can see that. So, yeah.
You'll have to take my word for it. He's much more svelte now. He would not make a convincing Santa Claus.
Yeah, well, I've fallen off the wagon lately. That's why I'm doing fewer videos and more podcasts. So, enough about me. I want to get to my audience now. I've got a few people who are listening to this show. I call them the Jewcurious, and so I want to see what you would have to say to these folks. Now, first off, let me ask you, what's the most important thing you would want people to know who aren't Jewish? What's the most important thing they should know about Judaism and the Jewish people?
The most important thing that a person who is not Jewish but is Jew-curious should know about Judaism is, in the words of my teacher, Avram Infeld, that Judaism is not a religion.
Okay, mind blown.
Judaism isn't a religion. If a religion is generally understood as a group of people who all share a set of common beliefs, or who all do a set of common practices. In the last big study of American Jews done in 2013 by the Pew Center for Research, they found that nearly 40% of the people who said, yes, I'm Jewish, also said, I'm an atheist or an agnostic.
Okay.
Nearly half of the people who said they were Jewish also said they weren't believers. And in that same study, when they asked about Jewish practice, they found that only something like half of all Jews fast in Yom Kippur, and only like a quarter of all Jews celebrate Shabbat every week. So if we don't all believe the same thing, and we don't even all practice in the same way, we kind of don't fit the standard definition of a religion.
Okay.
So we have to be something else.
Well, that raises a question that I see online and hear quite a bit. Is Judaism then a race?
Judaism is definitely not a race, because a race is something that you are born into and it stays consistent over the course of your lifetime. And of course, somebody can join the Jewish people. So we're not a race. It's not in your blood. What I think we are is I think we're a family. I think we're a family. A family is a group of people that shares a common story about origins, where we came from, and shares a sense of a shared destiny, where we're going together. And within a family, there are people who believe one way or believe another way, or live one way or live another way, but they're bound together by this shared sense of common story, common history, and common destiny. And somebody can join a family, or you can join a family through adoption. You can join a family through marriage.
I mean, you can have a common genetic origin. You can be born into a family, or you can, for example, marry into it. And we're back to this metaphor of sort of conscious joining. of another narrative.
And I know people who were born into their families biologically. I know people who entered into their families through adoption. I know people who have families by birth and families by choice, and those aren't always exactly the same thing. Families are semi-permeable membranes, right? They are real things with real boundaries, but those boundaries are permeable enough to allow families to grow and change and morph over time. And that's real, right? Somebody who joins a family through adoption isn't less a member of the family than somebody who was born into the family biologically. Like, God forbid, there's a special place in hell for somebody who tells an adopted child, you're not really a part of this family.
Right.
Somebody who joins a family is a part of the family, and that's, I think, what we are. We're not a religion in the sense of a group of people who all believe the same way or all act the same way. We're a family in the sense of a group of people that say, this is where we came from and this is where we're going. And we are welcoming for people to come be with us, but to be with us, just like to be a part of a family, is something serious. Because
so back
families
to
responsibilities to each other.
So back to this idea of the semi-permeable membrane. Let's talk about the semi part of that. Like, it's not just 100% inclusive that anybody who feels like joining can declare themselves suddenly a part of this family. There's a barrier. I mean, it lets people in under certain conditions. It lets people out under certain conditions. But what's that barrier?
Right, so there is a process, right? If I went into your home and sat down on your couch and held myself to a beer from your fridge and announced that I'm now part of the Carrier family, well, you might be willing to put up with that for a night. Probably that would get old pretty quick. I can't just declare myself a member of somebody else's family.
Right, you're not Cosmo Kramer.
I'm not Cosmo Kramer, though my hair at various times has borne some resemblance to his. No, in order to join a family, there is a process, and that process is either an adoption process or a marriage process or some sort of a formal way of declaring one's intention and being accepted into this new constellation of people committed to each other. So one way to become Jewish is to be born into Judaism. Another way to become Jewish is to go through the conversion process, which is a process like adoption, is a process like marriage, of declaring one's intention to become Jewish, of demonstrating through one's actions that one takes seriously their membership in the Jewish family, and then being affirmed and welcomed by members of the Jewish family into the tribe through a ritual.
Okay. Now, let's go back to the people who are born into the family. Now, I think I have a number of listeners who were born Jewish, no question about that, but maybe haven't been hanging around, and maybe they didn't have a Jewish education. They did Hanukkah and things like that, but they didn't really feel connected to it, or maybe they left engagement after the bar mitzvah, and they're adults now, and they're kind of curious, and they're saying, okay, what, if anything, have I been missing? What do you think is the most important thing to teach people who are Jewish but don't really feel connected to it now? What are they missing?
Well, I want to say, first of all, that one of the things about your family is they always have to welcome you back. So whether you have felt alienated from this Jewish family for any number of reasons or for any amount of time, the door is always open for you to find your way back to recommit to being a part of this. There's no such thing as a member of the family who is permanently alienated from the rest. There's only members of the family who go on walkabout and then eventually come back home. So that's the first and most important thing. And then what does being part of this family, what benefit does it convey? What essential value does it offer? I think, like anything, you get out in direct proportion to what you put in. So a Jew who goes to synagogue maybe once or twice a year, maybe eats a latke on Hanukkah and eats a piece of stale matzah on Passover, but doesn't really do anything else, is not likely to actually get that much from the experience of being Jewish. They're putting in a minimal investment and they're getting back a minimal return. I think the more vibrantly Jewish one's life is, the more one commits to making Jewish rituals, ideas, and practices a daily part of your life, the more benefit being part of this people offers.
So you're welcome back in the family, but you should call your mother.
Yes. We want you back. We want you back. She misses you.
Right. And no, I love this idea that you get out of it what you put into it. I mean, I can testify the more I put into it, certainly the more I've gotten out of it 100-fold. But it's not something you just walk back into with assumptions that it's going to be like it was when you left after your bar mitzvah, but really putting your adult self into it, I think.
Right. I think that a great many people are walking around with a very pediatric understanding of Judaism because they left regular Jewish practice when they were 12 or 13 years old. And the truth is 12 and 13-year-olds, while they may be very sweet, are still really not fully developed human beings yet. They're not fully developed in their capacity to understand. They're not fully developed in their capacity to think in abstract and more sophisticated ways. And so people are walking around with a Judaism that's perfectly appropriate to a 12-year-old, but is actually really not appropriate to a 22-year-old, 32-year-old, 42-year-old, or 52-year-old. We would never stop growing in our understanding of the world in middle school and think that was okay in another area. Why it would be okay to stop growing in our understanding of religion and spirituality in middle school and operate with a middle schooler's conception of that for the rest of our lives escapes me.
Right. And not for nothing, I'm always inspired by some heroes of the Torah who didn't really get started doing anything significant in their lives until they were way older. You know, I'm thinking of our father Abraham, who really shows up at age 75 and then has a very exciting career. And then Moses is like on his third career at age 80 and then gets a job offer, right? And then the rest of it is Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? And without bringing their whole selves, their whole adult selves, I learned this from Rabbi Jeremy Marquise, they wouldn't have that potential actuated, right? Now, I imagine you talked to quite a few people who are considering converting to Judaism in your line of work. But if somebody is listening to this podcast, they're thinking about converting and they don't have the benefit of taking your class, what's the most important thing that you would want to get across to those people?
So the most important thing is to find yourself a community. And whether you are in a big city where that's easy, like Los Angeles, or you're in a smaller place, chances are there's still a Jewish community that is available to you. Judaism is a team sport. It's something that we do together with other people, not just in our own private spiritual lives, but in our corporate, unified together lives. And so I would urge you, if you have a sense that there is something in Judaism that you want to explore, that you explore it in the context of Jewish community, that you find other Jews, and by doing that, open up the possibilities of your learning and practicing in ways that none of us could really do just sitting on our own.
Right. There's not a great Jewish history of, I'll say, hermetic pursuit, meaning, somebody goes into a mountain, a cave, and sits by themselves for 20 years to be more Jewish.
Right. And we are living, interestingly enough, because of the internet, because of social media, we are living in a world in which it's more and more possible to be a hermit, where we can sit in the dark of our own den and look through a computer screen and learn about anything. And in some ways, that's a tremendous blessing, right? It's a tremendous blessing that the two of us can have a conversation, and that conversation can go out to people all over the world and be a source of learning and inspiration for them. On the other hand, it poses a danger that people could think that all they need is within the box, that all they need is a click away. And I see the great benefit of the internet in this regard as empowering people who might never have felt empowered to go on a Jewish journey. But it's a starting point, not an ending point.
Okay, because this is actually really challenging to me, and I want to challenge you or be challenged by you, because I connect with quite a few people who may be the only Jew in town, or maybe the only person in town who's interested in Judaism, and feel very strongly pulled to the books that they read, to the podcasts they listen to, not taking any credit for that one, to the videos they watch, to whatever, and they feel attracted to it, and they want to learn more, but they're 2 hours away from the closest synagogue and 4 hours away from the closest, kosher butcher. How does that person get by if joining a physical face-to-face Jewish community is just not accessible to them? I mean, is there a way to optimize that other than just picking up and moving?
Well, so I think you do what you can, and it is really amazing that people like you and others are putting out so many resources out there that is making it possible for people who just don't geographically have the capacity to engage with Jewish community to be able to get the maximum amount of Jewish content that they can get in that circumstance, right? 10 years ago, or certainly 20 years ago, somebody in that position would be confined to whatever books they had in their local library. Now there is a whole world of Jewish content available to people irrespective of their geography, and that's definitely something to celebrate. I guess my point is that can take you quite far and much further than it ever could before. But there does come a point, I still believe, when it becomes important to be in relationship with other Jews, and it comes a time when it's important for those relationships to come in the context of actual supportive community that can move together. So, I would hope that for those people who find themselves really profoundly drawn to Judaism, but who are not at this moment able to access Jewish community, that they take advantage of every resource that is available to them, and that they also keep their eyes open for what can be opportunities, maybe opportunities that they didn't even know existed, to take that next step. It's really surprising the degree to which people think that they are all alone in an experience, but actually are surrounded by other people who are similarly in the experience of feeling all alone. I would suspect, with the exception of, some of your listeners who might live, on an ice floe in the Arctic somewhere, that actually, even in places where you wouldn't expect to find Jewish community, that it's there. It just might take a bit more looking and a bit more work in order to access it.
If you are listening to this podcast on an ice floe, please use your sat phone to text me. I would love to know about that. That'd be amazing.
There was that wonderful episode. You remember the TV show Northern Exposure?
I'm thinking of the same one. Yeah.
Right? The Joel Fleischer, the doctor who winds up in Sitka, Alaska, and he needs to sit Shiva, and there's this amazing episode where they go out and find 9 other Jews. Like one is a trapper living out in some cabin, and another one is a fisherman on a deep sea fishing boat, and it turns out that, wherever you are in the world, there are actually almost always some other Jews out there.
Right. I remember that.
We're not living in a sitcom, it is more true than a lot of people think.
Yeah, I remember that episode clearly. I don't remember a single other thing that happened on Northern Exposure except the one time that he gets Dr. Joel Fleischman gets the knock on his door, and they're sort of like 9 cowboy-looking dudes there who just rode across the plain and says, "Doctor, we're your minion. This here is Greenberg. I'm Goldstein." And no, thank you for that. Yes, just took me back into the 90s or whenever that show was from. So I've got a few more questions for you. These are questions that have been carefully and caringly submitted by people in this audience. And I said, if you submit a question, I'm going to ask it. So we're going to see what we get here. But these are good ones. So you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Growing up, I always felt Judaism. This is from a Jewish person, so just prefacing that. Growing up, I always felt Judaism was kind of, dare I say, dorky. Do you think Judaism is getting cooler? And does that even matter to you as a rabbi?
Well, I'm smiling because I really hardly think of either of us as the arbiter of cool. What I think of as cool may actually be a sure sign that it is, in fact, a bit dorky. I do think that Judaism is getting more accessible. I don't know if Judaism is getting cooler, but I do think Judaism is getting more accessible to a wider variety of people. And there's a greater recognition that there is more than one way to do Jewish. And so whatever Jewish life and practice looks like to an individual, chances are there is a Jewish organization or a Jewish community that takes that really seriously. There are Jewish groups that focus on hiking and wilderness experiences, and Jewish groups that focus on social justice, and Jewish groups that really get into exploring the Jewish culinary traditions of the world. It's not just sitting in synagogue and saying ancient prayers. There really are a lot of different ways to do Jewish, and some of them might even be ways that your listener would think of as cool.
Excellent. Now, this brings to mind this, again, the power of, or rather the gift of the internet as we have it right now, is that you can now find these things and people can get connected on this basis. And I'll say this goes back to our discussion of people who feel isolated. One of the good and occasionally dangerous things about the internet is that it allows people of similar interests to find each other way easier than they did before. And I think that's been great for building communities, even when those communities are hate groups. Sorry about that. But we won't go too far down that road. Not in this episode. So I have another question for you. How would you suggest a Jewish trans woman live in a most beautiful and authentic way in modern Judaism today? How can we live in a way like our matriarchs in today's day, fully unashamed and happy?
I think, first of all, something to celebrate is the fact that the Jewish tradition, not just in the last decades, but for 2,000 years, has recognized a diversity of gender expressions. Going back to the time of the Talmud actually classifies 4 different genders and talks about them in different terms and makes clear that there is certainly more to the human experience than just binary male and female. So I would hope that your listener, first of all, knows that the Jewish tradition has room for her and has room to celebrate and affirm her making the choice to fully realize her identity. So that's the first thing. And the second thing maybe is less positive, but I'll say that I'm not sure that the goal of Judaism is happiness.
Okay.
I'm not sure that the end goal is that we should all live entirely happy and with no sense of, I don't know what was the word she used. It wasn't angst, but I heard it a little bit in what she said. Judaism demands of us that we live a life of meaning, that we live a life of service, that we live a life of constantly striving to be more connected with God and with each other. And if that has the byproduct of making us happy, then that's great, but I'm not sure that that's the first and primary concern. I think the first and primary concern is living a meaningful, purposeful, engaged life. And in that way, Judaism is a constant source of almost a sacred dissatisfaction that asks us to keep growing every single day, to keep getting better, and to never say good enough is good enough.
Wow. Okay. So if anybody's looking for instant happiness, Judaism's not the way to do it. However, there's a lot more to be said about it. And there's, I think, as you pointed out, I would rather live a meaningful life than a constantly blissful life.
If you want
speaking for myself.
Happiness, eat a really big chocolate bar. If you want to live a life of deep meaning and service and purpose, and that can be a source not just of happiness, but of joy, which really is the kind of happiness that grows out of meaning rather than the kind of happiness that grows out of transient experiences, I think that there is a lot of joy to be had in Judaism.
Right. So
that's a different conversation for a different day.
Sure. I think it was Rabbi Aaron Alexander, who pointed out an article to me one time as a great source of material for the High Holy Days. I think there was a book about parenting called All Joy and No Fun.
Yeah.
Right. So, joy is a different sensation from fun. And I think it has to do with the gradations of meaning that you ascribe to an event. Now, one more question. I'm not sure if this is an easier question or a harder question, but here goes. Rabbi, when do you feel God in your life? And what is that feeling like?
So I'll say that I was raised in a family that fits solidly within that 40% of Jews who consider themselves very Jewish and are not necessarily believers. So I wasn't raised with a concept of God, and I'll tell you that faith for me doesn't come naturally. Right? It's not something that I have automatically. It's something that I need to work on each and every day to cultivate. And there have been times in my life, even times in the 7 years that I've been a rabbi, when I have felt deeply connected, and times when I have felt very much in a place of doubt or disconnect. And that has not made me feel less Jewish when I've been in that state, because I really do believe that it's possible to be a full participant in the Jewish family and not necessarily go through every day with a sure faith. That said, I have definitely had experiences in my life where I have felt a sense of connection with something bigger, where I have felt a sense of what's usually talked about as awe. Mm-hmm. And in those moments of connection, in those moments of reverence, I have sensed the presence of, I think, what our tradition refers to as God. Now, that's not a old man in the sky who issues rules and proclamations, and that's not as concrete as some of my friends and colleagues who experience God in a much, much more personal and intimate way. My sense has always been a bit more abstract, but I believe it is just as real.
Now, can you identify maybe an example or a moment where you did feel that connection? What occasioned that, or what were the circumstances of that? And if so, like what was that feeling like? Or describe that feeling. Like, how did it feel in your body?
I mean, I really should say that I've had that feeling most often in a synagogue or on a mountaintop, but I'll tell you that one of the places where I consistently get that feeling is at a rock concert.
Okay.
That moment of being at a concert where everybody is singing together, and you look around and there are 50,000 people and they're all making music together. That sense where we get a little intimation of the fact that our separateness may be more of an illusion than we like to let on. Those have been moments when I have felt something that feels quite akin to the feeling of God. And then I've had moments that are not with 50,000 of my best friends, but moments that are with one other person, with my wife, with a close friend, with a congregant, with a colleague or a student, where the conversation moves from surface to real depth, where there is some profound encounter between the two of us, and it feels like there is a third entity in the room, and that feels like God. So, I have had the experience in big collective settings where it feels like there is something bigger than me that I am a part of, and I've had that sense in much smaller, much more intimate settings where, in the words of Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher, God is dwelling between the I and the thou, between me and the person with whom I am having the most direct and deep kind of connection.
And just to keep drilling on this, what is that feeling like?
I think that feeling is a bit like 1 + 1 not necessarily equaling 2. That there is more going on than the sum of the parts. And that more feels like God. I don't really know how to put it better into words than that, than the sense of, in the case of connecting with another, feeling like there is more there than simply the meeting of two individuals. There is something greater in the room. And that feels very, very real. And that feels very much like God to me.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm gonna hold on. I think my allergies are acting up a little bit. So I'm going to move on. What are you working on right now that you'd like anyone who's Jewcurious to know about?
Well, continuing to expand our program to make it more and more accessible to people, both within Los Angeles and through our affiliates. We're in actually about 60 different communities around the country that are using the American Jewish University's Intro to Judaism program, making that experience as widely accessible to people as possible. That's what I wake up in the morning committed to doing, and I come into the office and I write curriculum and I reach out to other colleagues and I raise a bunch of dough, all to make Jewish experiences something which are accessible to anybody who wants them.
And how can people best connect with that or connect with you?
Well, people are certainly welcome to get in touch, and you can find my contact. I think that, John, you're going to put that up on this file so that people can see the website and send me an email. And if I can be of service to any of your listeners at any point to have a conversation about what Judaism looks like for them or to help them find resources within their own communities, I would be so grateful for the opportunity for more interactions to help more people find their way into doing more Jewish living.
Okay, well, I want you to be careful there because Jew-curious people ask hard questions, as you've just seen, but I can't think of anybody more able, qualified, have a big enough heart to answer them than you have. So thank you so much for being on my show. I've gotten a tremendous deal of value out of this, and I hope my listeners have too. So thanks again, brother. I really appreciate this.
Really a pleasure to be with you, and happy to see the work that you're doing to expand our family.
Of course. Happy to. Hero, thank you for listening to this great conversation with Rabbi Adam Greenwald. There are a few websites and things we mentioned along the way. I'm going to put all of those in the show notes to this show, and you can find that at jewcurious.show/episode 1. That's jewcurious.show/episode 1 for the show notes to this episode. In addition to those resources, I want to share something with you that I prepared. If you are somebody who is considering converting to Judaism and you're not quite sure what that entails, I've prepared a checklist for you. It's a checklist of the 4.5 steps to converting to Judaism. And so you make sure you know all the different things up front so that you don't have to be surprised in the end. And if you want to know what a half step is in this process, go ahead and download that checklist, and I put a link to that in the show notes. If you're listening during launch week, make sure you check out all the other episodes that came out at the same time. That's episode 0, this one, episode 1, and then episode 2 with Rabbi Idit Solomon, and episode 3 with Carla Jenkins. They're all fantastic for different reasons because they're very different people, but I share them with you because I think their stories and their work could be terribly helpful to you. One last thing before I sign off, and that's to remind you, if you haven't already, to subscribe to this podcast so that we can stay connected. And if you have enjoyed this show, if you've gotten any value out of it whatsoever, I'd like to ask you a favor, and that is to rate this podcast on iTunes or the platform of your choice. Go ahead and give it a little star rating. And this isn't just for me. This actually helps people find it who might find this show useful. It could also warn people off if you don't think this is a useful podcast. But go ahead and rate it to help people find it. Let people know what you think. And if you're feeling really generous, do me a solid and leave a comment. Leave a little short written review. Just take a couple of minutes, write your honest review. Again, that helps people find the show who may need it. It lets me know what you think of the show and how it can improve. And if you're able to rate this show and write a little review, I would be most grateful to you, hero. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, peace.
Thanks for listening to the Jewcurious Show at www.jewcurious.show.